We are sick of talking about illness. It's enough already. But unfortunately, it's our Parshat HaShavua. If Sefer Shmot includes at its center an aesthetic of beauty in the Mishkan and its radiant colors and description of all the ornate elements within it, and Sefer Vayikra, by contrast, presents at its center an aesthetic of ugliness, of tuma, of impurity, of the lesions of tzara'at, and the description of the sequestering and the quarantining of an individual with this terrible disease. Now, tzara'at is a mysterious illness. It's sometimes mistranslated as leprosy. It's inaccurate. But one thing is certain. I wish I could look away. I wish I could look away from Parshiot Tazria and Metzora with all their myriad details where the colors are there, but they're not an aesthetic of beauty anymore. So I'd like to share with you some thoughts about some lessons that perhaps we can tease out from Parshiot Tazria and Metzora, specifically regarding this illness and its spiritual dimension. Because here's what I see. If Parshat Tazria focuses on the diagnosis of the illness, the Parshat Metzora begins with the process of emergence from that state of being. Susan Sontag, the critical theorist, wrote an essay which became a book in the mid-70s called Illness as Metaphor. There are many assertions in that book that I cannot accept, but the opening lines in her New York Review of Books essay that became the book sticks with me. She writes, illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and in the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use only the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of that place. And so we open Parshat Metzora, the second of our two Parshiot. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Zot tieh Torat HaMetzora b'yom tahorato v'uva el hakohen. This is the process, the Torah of the Metzora, the teaching for the Metzora. On the day of his purification, it should be brought to the Kohen. V'yatza Kohen l'chutz lamachane v'ra Kohen v'hinei nirpa nega hatzarat min hatzarua. We learned that the first step is that the physical ailment has been healed. So the process of transition out of illness in Parshat Metzora is not about physical healing, but of a spiritual process of recognizing that there was a certain tum'ah, a certain ritual impurity that fell upon this individual, the Tumat HaMetzora, and now the process of how they emerge. V'tziva kohen v'lakach lamitaher shtei tziporim chayot tehorot ve'etz erez ushni tolat ve'ezov. Very mysterious process that involves the Kohen taking two pure live birds and a stick of from a cedar tree and a thread of crimson and some hyssop. We can't focus on all of the elements here. Just going to home in on one portion of this, which is the elements of the Eitz Erez contrasted with the Ezov, the piece of cedar wood contrasted with the piece of hyssop of Ezov, this mossy substance. Rashi writes that these two elements are here in order to remind a person of the moment when they're being purified of the cause of their illness and the process of purification. Eitz Erez is a tall cedar tree reflecting pride, but overweening pride and haughtiness. The Shem Mishmuel, Rabbi Shmuel of Sachachov, challenges Rashi's approach. He asks why hint to the afflicted of his prior arrogance and pride, rather than focus on the current moment. The Metzora is now healed physically. That healing, if the cause was sin, it's a spiritual disease, the physical manifestation, then that part's already been taken care of. The Metzora is ready to emerge from Tuma. The lesions are gone. Then why demand that there be a further feeling of debasement? Right now, was the illness not enough? So the Shem Shmuel believes there's another dynamic at play, that really the Eitz Erez, the piece of cedar wood from the tall tree, and then the moss from the Ezov, the hyssop, is another message for the Metzora, who is now healed, who needs a spiritual process of recalibration of their sense of self in the wake of the impact of the illness on themselves. The Ibn Ezra, he notes, says that of the times when we use these elements and there's some kind of sprinkling or daubing that's going on, the Eitz Erez and the Shni Tolat, together with the Ezov, appear in the world of the Metzora. But there is also the use of hyssop, of Ezov, both on Pesach, in the Pesach of Mitzrayim, where they had to daub the wall, the doorposts and the lintel with blood before the Seder, as well as the time of the Paraduma, where hyssop is dipped into the water of the Efer Para that's sprinkled on the individual who is Tameh. So why should that be? Why do we only require Ezov for one element and we require Ezov and Eitz Erez for the other, for the story of the Metzora? The element of pride itself has its place. It's not entirely evil. It has some benefits to it. Witness the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin. A person should feel, Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, the world is created for me. It does have a certain self-centered element to it, a focus on self. Or take, for instance, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tema bids us, Havei az kanamer, be bold as a leopard, and it goes through each of the animals to tease out part of its main strength, and concluding, La'asot Ratzon Avicha Shebashamayim. Says the Shemi Shmuel, total self-abnegation is not the ideal. An overwhelming sense of submission, of lowliness, leads a person to despair and paralysis. And the process of healing, of repatriation to the kingdom of the well, includes the recalibration of one's sense of self. Shekol Eila Hamidot, he writes, Hein Hagbahat Halev, Vehein Hachni'av Hashvelut, the attributes, the characteristics, both of sense of self and also of submissiveness, both of these, shehein b'taharatan, when they're in their state of purity, kol achat b'mokoma hara'ui, in the right proportion, the right position, v'hatzarich, and that which is necessary, hu tov, that is good, v'lo b'mokomo, v'shelo b'mokomo hu raf, it's out of whack, it's out of balance. That is something that needs redress. The fulfillment of mitzvot itself demands a certain simcha shal mitzvah, ivdur Hashem b'simcha, and the hachna'ah, therefore, a sense of submissiveness that is desirable. It needs to be characterized by awe instead of paralysis. He quotes from the Rambam that the Rambam describes a person should meditate on the wondrous creations of Hashem and should see the great wisdom of Hashem in the world. And when a person will contemplate all of this, first, they will feel a great sense of love and attraction to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but then they'll feel so inadequate. Person will relent, they will retreat, they will tremble, and they'll be panicked, practically, terror-stricken. The individual is no more than a dark and lowly creature, with such limited intellect, so such a paucity of understanding, before the one who is complete in his knowledge. And therefore, what needs the purification for the Metzora? You need a sense both of the Eitz Erez, a piece from a tree that is tall and proud, that is balanced with the lowly Ezov, the unbalanced sense of unworthiness, of submissiveness. A crisis of confidence was brought on by a sense of alienation from a world that kept on rolling while this individual was sequestered in their quarantine. And they were out of circulation. To recalibrate the sense of hachna'ah means to expand the sense of submissiveness, to be not a submissiveness to the illness, but a submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a shift from constricted thinking, comparing myself, woe unto me, I'm self-pity, compared to the rest of the world, to viewing all of humanity and all of creation as under the banner of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and submitting to the sense of awe and to redirecting or rechanneling, I could say almost sublimating one's sense of submissiveness, instead of it becoming an element of paralysis, redirecting it to a submission to the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the spiritual process of healing is of recalibrating that sense, confidence and submissiveness, but both under the banner of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and rebalancing it. This is the process, Zot Torah HaMetzora. This is the spiritual process of recalibration that of necessity needs to happen. In Mitzrayim, in Egypt, the Jewish people are compared to the lowliest bramble, to the sneh that's burning because it is so low. And therefore, they don't require a piece of Eitz Erez. They never had a sin of Gasut HaRuach. There was no haughtiness on their part. But what did they have? A surfeit of feeling low, of self-abnegation. In Para Aduma, an individual has lost a loved one. This was not a result of their smugness or arrogance. They simply had an interaction with death, and it has a defiling spiritual impact on them. And therefore, the idea now of purification in both cases was of using the lowliest of elements, the hyssop, the azov, and the symbol of purification is channel your hachna'ah from being either a result of your feeling of exile and dislocation, or conversely, of the exile and dislocation and the sadness and the fear of death that you encountered, by taking this lowly element and bringing it into the service of Hashem. The Shem Shmuel writes, that's exactly what David HaMelech davens, Tichateni ve'ezov ve'etar, sprinkle me with the hyssop and I'll be purified. And here Rashi on that pasuk from Tehillim 51, a chapter about the process of tshuva of David HaMelech, is he says, Kimoshi mitar ha-metzora utmei made, as the Metzora and one who has experienced death have to be purified. The Shem Shmuel says, but he wasn't a Metzora. Over here, Tamei mate, he had to deal with a lot of death, but what does it reflect? The fear of David HaMelech is the degree to which he has fallen in his own eyes. His own self-image is damaged, and he's on the brink of despair and paralysis, even in relationship to Hashem. Therefore, he reaches for the image of the Azov that can help him recalibrate his hachna'ah, sense of submissiveness, properly under the banner of Hashem. Look, our overconfidence, our certainty about the world such as it is, about the functioning of the world in the Olam Hazeh, about health from a collective vantage point, all of that was undermined by COVID-19. Over the period of this pandemic, we all experienced a sense of displacement from the life we knew before. And now, as many of us start to re-engage with the world, we too may need a sense of a recalibration, a spiritual purification. Some were very easily able to bounce back to resume normal life, but others may still feel stuck. And sometimes that's warranted because there still are health concerns, etc. But sometimes those health concerns, the sense of pachad, the sense of hachna'ah, has taken on a life of its own. Maybe that's getting unhealthy. Maybe that has to be thought out, again, in consultation, of course, with one's medical professional, but to think a little bit, what does it mean that I am still living in a sense, in a state of quarantine, if in point of fact, there are good reasons to believe that maybe there are manageable risks now that can enable me to re-engage the world. Perhaps, suggests the Shem Shmuel, the process of purification includes, for the Metzora, reminds us that healing must of necessity include an internal dimension of fixing of one's attitudes and beliefs as part of taking hold of the passport to once again becoming citizens of the kingdom of the well. And so may it be for us. Shabbat Shalom.